much ahead of its times, and it's really quite guiltless also, which is important. And I think it's important to remember that we are pagans in the good sense of the word, whereas the West is coming back to paganism now, and it creates a schizophrenia, because if you think about Monica Lewinsky and all these problems, if there's a presidential candidate and they're caught with some other woman, that's the end of their campaign. So that Puritan mentality hasn't gone, even in the most open society. So the schizophrenia over sexuality and pleasure is a part of the modern condition, and that's why Freud talks about repression. But in this culture, you don't have to go that way. But unfortunately, in the 19th century, that's what happens, because under colonialism, there's so much repression. And, in what sense? That the Devadasis are outlawed, they're gentrified, and men having concubines, that gets frowned upon. And, an ideal of monogamous relationships is imposed, if you see Bonkin. And then this widow or this other woman becomes that threatening figure who has to be banished, whether it's in Chokher Bali, Binodini, or in Bishop Rickshaw, all these novels. So what happens is the narrowing of the Indian mind, in the 19th century. And now, we are opening up again, but in a very clumsy way. There's a silent sexual revolution, but it's created this miscuing in society, one of whose really terrible side effects is this whole Nirbhaya thing, So we're going through this incredible and traumatic transition in India, in the land of Kama Sutra and Khajuraho, where we are slowly coming to terms with an open sexual culture, and yet the libidinal energies are very much under tight control, you see, in large sections of our society.
Yeah, well, one quick thing on Vatsyayana. I'm clinical as he might be. The critical difference between him and Bill Masters is possibly that Bill Masters documented what happens, and Vatsyayana what can happen. I think the sheer fact of, the thing about the Kama Sutra was opening up of possibilities for a whole lot of us, which I think is very interesting. But, one of the things of denying eros, which is what you were talking about, is essentially, what happens to us physically, what cannot be denied is one thing, but then there are lots and lots of sexual experience that we have, which we deny ever having had, including desires, which is also possibly one of the reasons why there might be so much of discomfort about reading about sex, which you were talking about to begin with. And it also falls upon the writer to foremost not deny, however uncomfortable they might be, sexual experiences, even ephemeral sexual experiences that he or she might have had, desires that he or she might have had, to take them, to confront them, because that is where it must begin from, in a sense, right? But what I also wanted to ask you guys was, since you're a woman and you're a man, one of the possible difficulties, and I was telling her earlier that is what would intimidate me, is when you're writing about sex, imagining the other. So as a man writing about a woman's sexual experience, and I know you haven't done that with this book, but hopefully there will be a lot more books and you will write about it. So as a woman writing about the male sex experience, can that be tricky?
It is tricky in a way, but when you're a writer, you can't simply write. I don't think you can write only from your own whatever gender position. I think that's very essentialistic, I think the challenge of a writer is to write from different positions without kind of fudging, You've got to, for me, in Body Offering, this character, this female protagonist called Sunaina, was the most difficult character for me, even to conceive of and to try and, bring to life. And I found that this character was always sort of getting the better of me, you know, because I kept seeing my own limits, you know, in trying to understand her. And there is a section in which she writes to this, her significant other, this man she's in love with, and she says, like, what's wrong with you men, you know? She's saying, in a way, she's saying, what's wrong with, like, the male species today? You know, what's happened to the men? Where are the men? Why can't you own up to a woman like me? And she says, when you see a woman like me, why is it that everybody's in retreat? Because this is a woman who kind of imagines herself, I mean, she's not predatory, but she's very passionate and she's very mercurial. And she finds that all these men are constantly in retreat from her. They don't know what to do. I mean, she's a kind of scary proposition. And she writes him this letter and says, that's who I am. And like, do you have the guts to, you know, sort of own me up and say, yes, I want you? I challenge you, you know. So I found that, what I'm trying to say is I found that it's very difficult to actually set limits, you know, on this otherness. And I think, I mean, women's sexuality has you know, fewer limits, if you want to use that word, than men's, you know. And there are many, I mean, you can sort of stereotype it, essentialize it, but I think that there's some biological reason for this, you know, including, you know, exteriority, interiority, and, you know, sort of multifocality versus, you know, a single focus. I mean, so the complexity of this is really challenging. But I think that, you know, going back to D.H. Lawrence, one of the things that happens is that there is a crisis in masculinity also, you know, in modern times, you know. The men are disappearing. And what happens is there's so much misogyny on the one hand, and there's no opposite word for it. I mean, we say misanthropy, but that's not what it is. It's misandry, if there's any word like that. So essentially, what you have is the two sexes kind of hate each other, within quotes. They're always struggling against each other, and it's almost impossible for them to be at peace and find harmony, because the moment they find harmony, they're back to struggling and fighting. And you know, as I think you, in your talking points, you sent us this quote by Oscar Wilde, where he says that...
I'm hoping to come to it later.
Please do.
It later.
But I think that sums it up in some ways, you know.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, but so it's very challenging to write about, say, women's sexuality, if you're a man or vice versa. But, you know, honestly, I mean, actually there's no limits. It's only the mind which has limits, you know.
That's true. That's true. Or we think it does, in any case. You know, I would like you to take this question up as well quickly, especially given earlier we were talking about how, since he brought up the hate between men and women, how that not only plays a role in writing about sex, imagining the other, but also actually perhaps while having sex, during the sexual experience.
The aggression, you mean? Yeah, the problem of aggression. And I think that's, Vatsayan said this as well, I believe, but sex's transcendent potential is very intimately linked with dealing with the problem of aggression during the sexual encounter and finding safe ways to play with it and enjoy it.
But also the other question that I wanted to ask you, which was that would you be wary of taking on, imagining the other, imagining the male sexual experience and writing about it?
I think I haven't been bothered yet. I've sort of been very focused on the female sexual experience. And
do you, is that something you think about? Is that something that you've thought about at any?
The male sexual experience?
Yes. Have you?
Yes, I think the crisis of masculinity that Makaran referred to it's a reality, and it is linked to aggression. The aggression that's innate to the male and, well, to the human condition. I think men have come to be very wary of their own aggression, and, well, women as well, but staying with the male experience, when when you're at odds with your own aggression, it's difficult to approach the sexual moment as a full person. And also, I think that men in this moment bear the burden of having to be with women who have been hurt, profoundly hurt by men. So they have to receive their women's mourning and rage. And especially with sort of monogamous partners, if you're receiving a woman's rage about men all the time, then it's difficult to come to the sexual moment with your aggression as a man and enjoy it, because even though it might still be enjoyable for that woman at that moment.
You know, what might be some of the other traps that you'd advise writers to avoid when writing about sex? One of the things that comes to mind, of course, is the anxiety as a writer of writing about sex. All said and done, you're putting it down on paper and you know it's going to be read and it's going to be judged. And you're going to be judged, because it's impossible in the society we live in not to be judged. So is that a factor at all?
Well, it depends, because I mean, like, you may use a pen name, you know, you may have another identity if you please. But see, for example, I'm a professor, okay, and I mean, I teach at a major university in Delhi, and it does make you think that, you know, you go to class and somebody's read your novel and say, look, this guy, you know, he's a sleazy old whatever, you know. But then you see, it's also about the courage to, you know, really put yourself out there. And, you know, for example, it was interesting when my book was launched in Delhi at the India International Center, and we read passages from it. I was in conversation with another writer who was actually a former student, you know, of our own Center for English Studies at JNU, where I teach. And she's written 2-3 novels. She's a well-known writer, Devapriya Roy. And she was in conversation with me, and I had taught her. And my colleagues were there, and so many of my students were there. Some had come out of curiosity. There was an Facebook page of the English Center. The people had put posts about, you know, and I was sort of not quite palpitating, but I was a bit nervous. I was saying that, oh gosh, you know, because, you know, in class you have a persona. You're known as somebody, you know, and you have certain values. You do things in a particular way, and then people read this and say, oh, he's written a, you know, sleazy book, so to speak, even if it's not a sleazy book. And then it all came together, and I said that it's a very important moment for me that my different personae are merging today, this evening. And I see my own students. Tomorrow I'm going to face them in class. And I don't feel ashamed today when passages from my book are being read. And it was a very liberating moment for me, you know. So I think that, I think U.R. Ananthamurthy said somewhere that when you write, you know, it's like you're nude before God. Like this, you know, that act of writing is an act of, it's an act of incredible integrity. You can't fake it when you're writing it, you know. When they say you fake it to make it, but I think that may work for sex, but it may not work for writing, you know, because, you know, when you fake it, it's found out. And this is the problem with this bad writing that you talk about, that it's so fake, you know, it doesn't have that sap, that substance.
It's also
you know?
the problem with bad sex.
Isn't it? Yeah,
Bad
it's
sex.
see, that's the worst thing. It's when bad sex tries to masquerade as good sex, which is badly written. I think that's the worst kind of, I don't know if that makes sense. It's the worst kind of sex writing, which we have to completely try to avoid, you know. And there's so many examples of that.
Yeah. As we all know. Any thoughts on that, the anxiety of the writer? And especially since you're a woman, I'd really like to get your opinion on this.
Well, we all know how I got around it. I put a pen name on the book and decided not to make public
Well, but then here
appearances.
you
I think
are.
there's tremendous
Yeah.
anxiety. Yeah, I was thinking several times during our conversation about Lawrence, and there's something he said that I was recalling, which is he wrote, I've spent my whole life doing one thing, which is trying to show that the sex relation is valid and legitimate and precious. And the best I've done is Lady Chatterjey's lover, but it will only bring me abuse and hatred. And I definitely found myself kind of clenching in expectation of abuse. There was a newspaper article in the Times of India about our session,
Yeah.
and the presence of a woman who's writing about erotica, and several people had posted, this is just going to lead to more rape. Women shouldn't be allowed to write or read or something, some ridiculous comments along the line. But it made me anxious. I looked at it and I was like, and that's unfortunate. It's really sad. And if that kind of cultural evolution that you were talking about earlier is actually happening, then it's going to eventually going to be safer to write about sex, to talk about sex, and to have an open dialogue without feeling like we have to hold our breath to do it.
Well, maybe we should have morally sensitized disclaimers at the end of the session, but for now we'll just keep talking. Which brings me to that Oscar Wilde quote that we were discussing earlier, where he said that everything in life is about sex, except sex. Sex is about power. And it's a quote that has, like a lot of Oscar Wilde quotes, never actually left me. It's revealed itself in very many different ways through my life. So, of course, I'd like your thoughts on it, but it also makes me want to ask you guys about using sex as a metaphor in writing. You know, when not related, you know, to intimacy as such, but maybe power, maybe the times we live in, whatever.
I think that's inevitable but you know, when you really think about what Wilde said, and you can switch it around, and you can say that, you know, everything in life is about power except power, and power is about sex. So, I mean, so it works in many different ways, is what I'm saying. But obviously, sex is a metaphor, and sex is a fact, and also sex is symbolic, and also sex is metaphysical. I mean, one of the things that I wanted to try to do is to kind of rediscover the bridge between the physical and the metaphysical. Because, you know, at one level, you know, mere physicality leaves you cold in the end. There's nothing there. The body qua body is just matter. It's just thul, you know, as they say. It's just dead. It's inert. So unless there's something that animates it, you know. So, I mean, that's the whole point, that at that very moment when, I mean, there's a poem of mine where I say that, you know, in the end, what do men and women do with one another? You know, they lie down together, naked, side by side, and their bodies cry or something, you know. So it's like that. It's also in the moment of greatest intimacy is also the moment of greatest loneliness. And it's only when the body ceases to be merely the body, you know, where, as I said, where you can discover this link, this missing link, you know, where the limited suddenly starts shooting off into the unlimited, as it were. You know, I think it's that moment where human sexuality can approximate, you know, that Brahmananda, you know, because they say the aesthetic experience in Abhinav Gupta's Brahmananda Sahodara. So it's born from the same udara, you know, the same womb as that. And you know, Sri Ramakrishna, somebody asked him, they said that you ask